AI isn't just transforming industries, it's transforming careers. Some people build AI products, others invest in them. Few have done both. Yariv Adan has spent 17 years at Google building and developing AI products, and now as a VC investor and founder of Ellipsis, he invests in early-stage AI startups. Welcome to Sync, WeBloom's original podcast where we uncover the untold stories of tech shaping our societies. Today, we'll be unpacking Yariv's journey, what he thinks makes a winning AI investment, and why he thinks Switzerland might be the next AI epicenter. Yariv, welcome to the Sync podcast. We're so happy to have you on here. And today we really want to kind of unpack everything that's happening in AI. There's so much talk, so much hype. And I think as the normal layman like me, I'm not an AI expert. I'm really, really intrigued to have a conversation to get to the bottom of where all of this interest is coming from, what use is it going to give for us as society, and what should we look out for? What are maybe some of the pitfalls or blind spots that we haven't noticed yet in all of this hype and excitement, and what we should definitely be conscious of? So, but before we go there, I think we need to maybe take a couple of steps back and dig deep into your origin story,
Okay.
which is very colorful. And maybe we can start at Google. Take us back to your time at Google. I mean, you were working there on AI before it was mainstream, before there was all of this hype and excitement. So maybe tell me a little bit about what drew you to AI in the first place.
Yeah. So first, thank you for having me. It's always a fun topic to have a conversation about. So I actually I joined Google in 2007. It was a much smaller company, much more like a startup. And very early on, I understood that I have this unique opportunity to start things at Google and have amazing resources, which is like, amazing people. And of course, all the software and hardware and other resources that we had. So at the beginning, I started privacy, which was really early on. Then I started working on emerging markets when it was very early on. And in 2014, 15, I got excited a lot about AI. It was, the new summer of AI, starting with the computer vision, and then also speech became really well. And a few friends and I felt that we were getting into this new era where until then we learned how to use computers. People learned how to use Windows, how to use Word, how to use the mouse. And suddenly AI is learning how to communicate with us in a natural way. So we kind of got excited by that, and we thought that, hey, Google can have a lead in that space. So the first thing we thought to start was, wouldn't it be cool, instead of you sending a query and getting an answer, that you can actually get into a conversation with Google, get answers, and run actions? And that was the origin of the Google Assistant. I was part of the very small team that started that. Shortly after, we decided to add eyes to the assistant and let it see what's going on. And that's how we started basically Google Lens. That was the origin of Google Lens. And then for a few years, I got interested in more and more capabilities. So for example, in automation. So back then I worked on Duplex and Duplex Web. If you remember, that was the ability to automate tasks via phone call or via browser. I worked for the longest time on how to create a contextual and proactive assistant. So I think it was like a lot of very early on, in many ways, the technology was not ready yet, but exploring this new idea of an ambient AI thing that you can communicate in multiple ways and can do things for you. I stayed in that space of the consumer for 6 or 7 years. And then I missed a little bit solving real problems and delivering a real value. So I switched to cloud AI and to lead conversational AI. So that was like, again, taking speech and natural language and solving problems for Google customers. So I allow them to use Google AI to solve their own problems. The biggest use case was actually contact centers. How can you deploy this kind of robots that have good experience for users using AI? And I got very excited because finally we had a problem where the technology was good enough, not perfect, but good enough to deliver value. Managed to enjoy that for a year or two, and then suddenly Gen AI happened. And then I found myself at the center of that, and again, co-leading applied Gen AI. So trying to first race into this model race at the early stages, and also see how can we help customers, Fortune 500s and others, deploy that and get value. So yeah, I have been for 10 years, and some people kind of got to see AI at the ChatGPT moment. It seemed, this is a kind of unique point in time. But this perspective actually allowed me to see it a bit different. I've seen actually the breakthrough after breakthrough that built up to make that moment happen. And also in perspective of 2.5 years after, I think that we're actually seeing an acceleration of that. So we're seeing more and more breakthroughs, and it makes sense because there is just bigger opportunity and more resources are poured into it.
Sure, yeah. So we're now at that tipping point where we've built that critical mass foundation of maybe the right sort of technology, the right sort of compute power, that now we see some of the fruits of that labor that you're talking about, that you are really sounds like you're at the beginning of that kind of AI. But maybe to kind of, unpack a bit of what you're saying, because you were really there at the beginning when maybe even the way we're talking about it was completely different. And today there's a lot of terms going around. There's AI, there's Gen AI, there's agentic AI. Can you give us some sort of clue of how we can differentiate? For example, what's the difference between Gen AI and agentic AI?
So Gen AI so I think it's interesting to look if you want to look at the development of AI. It's interesting if you want to write an application that recognizes cats from dogs. So if you go first to the old way before AI, a developer would need to write code with very specific rules that you say, hey, a cat has 4 legs and a head that looks like this, it's this big, And then, of course, the problem's rules are always broken because it's hidden behind the chair, so you see only one ear, or there is a little bit of dark, right? So this is quite very unstable. Then AI came, and what AI did, it allowed to learn implicitly without rules, but by examples.
Mm-hmm.
So you basically train a model by showing it example. Here is a cat, here is a dog, here is a cat, here is a dog, here is a cat, here is a dog. And after enough examples, it learns basically implicit rules that are encoded in the model to know what's a cat and what's a dog. And if you show enough example of cats are, behind things, in the dark, in different angles, it will also know to recognize this. The problem here is that someone needs to create that collection of here is a cat or here is a dog, to collect the pictures, clean them up, annotate. And maybe cats and dogs are easy, but if you want to do it to recognize in the medical space or translating or answer questions in areas of legal or medical domains, you need experts. Experts are slow, are expensive, and are hard to get. So this is the reason why all the AI, you had a model that needed to do a specific task, and you had people to collect and annotate that collection, and it was slow, and this is why it was big tech game. Then LLMs or Gen AI came, and the idea over there we're not going to train for task. We're going to train for general understanding of language and the world. So basically, imagine you take a very, very large model that can basically hold a lot of information, and you basically let it read, let's start for read, everything that was ever written and is encoded. And this could include the videos, all the internet, books and whatnot. And you train it in a way that, I don't know if you want to get into it, but there was also a very smart way to train it in a way that you don't need any human intervention. So it gets a very basic understanding of language and the world. And then the big thing that Gen AI did is that they said, now, if you want to do a specific task, all you need to do is to give a small description of what the task is and a few examples. And this is the prompt, right? So the prompt, what it does, it takes this generic model that can do a lot of things, and then it tells him, here is the specific task I want you to do, here are some examples, please continue on and do it, and the models can do it. The problem with Gen AI, the way this was trained, the model was basically, given the prompt, it was predicting what is the most likely next word to come after that. It was looking only in its own information that it was trained on. The information, because training used to take a few months, the information was a bit old. So imagine even the smartest person, when you are locked in a room and I'm asking you, what's the time? With a gun pointed at your head, you need to make up something up. You don't have a watch. It has nothing to do with intelligence. Or if I'm asking, how many people, what's the current population of Adlesul where we are, if you haven't seen that exact, you will estimate. These are the famous hallucinations. Right? So basically the model doesn't have that exact data, or maybe the data appeared in multiple versions in the web, or maybe it's like not refreshed to the last, news, right? There's no idea of news, no idea of stock. And if you're putting a gun to its head and say answer, it will make up something that looks plausibly and likely, but is not accurate, right? So Gen AI is basically using this model to predict based on its knowledge and what is accessible. What agentic AI took is the next step and said, okay, how do we make this more useful? And in agentic AI, it gave access to the model beyond its knowledge, also access to tools. And we basically train the model so it knows, hey, you have a watch. So if you're asked what's the time, look at the watch. Here's how you operate it. If you are asked for a stock ticker value, here is a search engine. You should ask it the question. If you are asked about some fact about our company, here is our documents. Please search over them. So agentic AIs have the ability to use tools, and they also have additional kind of memories and a little bit of logic. So basically, they use the model as a generic engine of understanding the task, planning how to solve it, and understanding how to use these tools to solve the problem. So it builds kind of a new application stack on top of this model's ability to understand language, understand the world, and do some planning and reasoning.
Okay, so Gen AI being kind of the input output, it's kind of going off of the information that it has, right? The data. And depending on the limitations of that data, it's not able to tell us, I don't know. It's going to kind of make up something, or maybe in some models, they've kind of programmed it to be able to say, I don't have this information.
You can, but yes, they're limited. They're limited to their own knowledge, right? You can think of their knowledge as a compressed information of everything that was available at the time of that training.
And then agentic AI being basically an upgrade from that.
It's not it's an extension of that. There is still a model at the core, so they give the model the prompt, but within the prompt, you're also saying here is the available tools. You don't see it as a user. But the agentic AI application in the prompt says, here are the tools that are available to you. Here's in what case you should use that tool. And then the model usually makes the decision. Okay. There is also, of course, all sorts of flavors.
So okay, this is very useful. So now we know what Gen AI is, what agentic AI is. You were there from the beginning at Google, kind of making sense of it, understanding how to get the right LLMs, training the models. So after spending 2 decades at Google with all of these resources at your hand, as you said, having the talent, having the resources, for technology like AI that takes so much compute power, so much expertise, right? You decide to leave Google in the end, leaving behind this kind of overflowing tap of resources, also the opportunity to reach scale. I mean, you're talking about you were at the consumer, on some consumer products like Google Assistant, where you have a very unique opportunity to have your product reach the scale and the market penetration, because Google is such a behemoth. So take us back to that moment that actually you decided, I'm going to leave these resources behind and maybe start new. What motivated this?
So actually, to me, the answer was like, why did I stay for so long? Right? I never planned for that. And I think for the longest time, there were always interesting, very interesting problems to work at scale, like you were saying, with a lot of resources. I never planned to work at Google until the age of 65, where I had a startup at the age of 25, and like every 5 years, I was 100% convinced I'm 5 years before retirement. So yeah, I actually turned 50 last year, and 50 was like, hey, it should be the year of the change. But I do think also that this was a perfect timing for starting a VC, and I think there was a kind of a why now, where AI shifted from a big players game to disruptor games. I actually, 10 or 12 years before I left Google, it was very clear to me that if I leave, I would leave to something like investment, because I felt that's the natural next step in terms of scaling. After you work at Google, the scale of problems that you work, and there is like a lot of complexity in the scale. Any textbook solution doesn't work at scale. So when I looked at and all the time I was like, my eyes were open, I was looking at startup, the problems seemed less interesting. But actually, when you are investing, again, you actually operate at a scale of multiple companies. And so that seemed like a natural transition. But actually, Gen AI did a big change in the AI space that make it very disruptor friendly. So first, I think if you look what Gen AI did, I think at the core of economically, it took the marginal cost of generating content and took it to zero. And when I'm taking generating content, it means in the broader sense. It means document, it means medical imagery, it means code, it means interacting with systems. So basically, if you compare what it takes to generate knowledge or anything that has to do kind of with the knowledge worker in a very broad expression, suddenly the cost of generating that content goes to zero compared to the human alternative. That is a complete rehashing of the entire economy and ecosystem. So for this disruption, it changes a business model, and it creates kind of an innovator dilemma for a lot of the big players. And it creates also a new blue ocean, green ocean, whatever you want to call it, opportunities for new players. But a few other things happen. One other thing, the one thing that the AI suffered from before Gen AI, and I think this was actually OpenAI, one of OpenAI's biggest innovations, was the curse of the long tail of quality. And self-driving cars is the poster child. So basically, you cannot launch the thing until it's 99.999999 accurate. And anyone that built AI knows that getting to 80% accuracy is very easy, and then every percent becomes harder and harder. So the companies that could invest in such very long period and long horizons were only companies with very, very deep pockets. You needed expertise that was very expensive. You needed resources, right? So this was a big player's game. What Gen AI did, it actually showed, and I think this is the innovation, because when we at Google looked at the large language, we were sitting on this for 5 years. We saw unperfect answering machines. We thought, we were always thinking search. Yeah, they can answer amazing things, but they're making things up. What OpenAI realized, no, there is a kind of Gen AI, even they didn't realize, they were surprised when they launched ChatGPT, but what we saw that even though it's imperfect, actually there are so many use cases because marginal generation of content is zero, you're actually ripping off a lot of value already. You can write code, and even the code is imperfect. It's much, much faster and cheaper to iterate on it. You can, analyze your document, you can create stuff, right? So all of these use cases that we're seeing don't suffer from this curse of long tail quality and deliver value, savings, and new opportunities. So that again changed. The other thing is that a lot of the use cases suddenly became software, which is again very startup friendly. Mm-hmm. And because now it touches almost everything, right? So we're seeing vertical solutions everywhere. The TAM is huge. It's trillions of dollars TAM opportunities. A lot of money comes. There is a lot of players. And the large players cannot move at this rate. And everyone is talking, now it's changing how you pay for software. You're moving from license to work-based. So again, any large company that is making money out of licenses has that innovator's dilemma. They can't move as fast. Mm-hmm. So this is why we saw this emergence of software. There is a real economic, market, technology, and stack reasons that are very disruptor-friendly, startup-friendly, compared to what AI was before. Yeah.
So the TAM being the total addressable market.
Yes, TAM being, just like, it touches everything, and this is why there is so much investments, and this is why if you're comparing the rate of how long did it take to launch a new model? How fast did intelligence develop? 2 years ago, today it's much, much faster because so much more resources are
So you
pouring.
basically saw that opportunity that, this is a Gen AI, agentic AI is fertile ground for startups, for VCs. And so this is why you wanted to shift from Google.
It's so I always, I felt that, at Google, it was an amazing ride, learned a lot, amazing friends, but and before Google, I spent 10 years in Israeli startups. I've been building products for nearly 30 years. I'm like, I was now, I had enough.
Born entrepreneur.
Yes, and I love what excites me is the meeting point of people, technology, and business, and I love being part of that. The more senior you are, the more you find yourself dealing with escalations and, So I was actually, very happy to go back and work with very early stage entrepreneurs and actually do less on the operational and that kind of part and really focus on helping on the strategy, on the product, the business thinking, and the go-to-market.
And how was maybe we can pause a bit on that transition, because you said you reached a point, you reached your 50th birthday and you're like, okay, I need to change something and maybe focus more on what you're passionate about, which sounds like entrepreneurial endeavors. But how was that transition? Like, what were some of the growing pains? Because of course, being at Google for 2 decades, you kind of get used to those processes. In kind of moving from there to a startup, was there any, maybe also with your family, right? Like, how was that personally and professionally for you?
So first, it wasn't clear cut, right? So I was involved, right? So for example, I was like the executive champion of Google for the AI startups accelerators in Europe. I was like, very much involved in that activity. I've been consulting and helping startups and founders and mentoring founders, for the longest time. So, it was kind of ongoing.
Did you get any pushback from your family? When you came home and you said, okay, I'm leaving my Google job to take this risk and jump into an unknown territory of AI investment and investing in startups. How did that go? Give us some insight into.
No, I think because
maybe there are some people wanting to make the same transition and want some advice.
So I think for the longest time, my close friends and family knew that I was, my original plan was actually to retire and do AI art. If I could do anything, I do AI art. I really wanted to be an artist. That's actually, yeah. And I did some works in that space. So
maybe another podcast on AI art.
So I had this, actually, my original plan was to retire and do AI art. I'm doing AI for good in different spaces and kind of enjoy life. So I was actually ready and preparing for that.
Okay.
So actually, the fact that I ended up starting a fund is the surprising. That was somewhere in 2023, over a coffee with old friends. We were discussing it, like, exactly, hey, 12 years ago, we were talking about if we leave Google, we will raise a fund. And then we said, hey, maybe the time is now. And maybe this is, so this is the guy that left Google before. The company sold it, so he was also looking at retirement. He said, hey, maybe this is a way to combine our hobbies, what we're passionate about, with a thing that is very interesting and a new learning curve, but also actually with an upside opportunity. And we had a very strong why now, this Gen AI and disruptor we recognized, but we also recognized an opportunity definitely in Europe for a need for investors in very early stage that are coming from the AI expertise and not from the financial point. So investors that are, can actually understand the domain, understand the founders, and really be hands-on and support them. So the idea was to really be early on, hands-on, very founder-friendly, and focus on deep tech. We had some convictions on where this thing is going. so that also built up gradually. So it's not that like, I left and didn't know where I'm going. It was very clear in the build-up, kind of a very natural flow from one to the other, almost like with no break. Yeah, so it was very natural. Yeah.
So now you're in the investment
Yes.
space. So your VC is called Ellipsis,
Yes.
and you're investing in early stage AI startup.
Yes.
So why go into investing? Why not create an AI startup? Why did you want to be on this side of the table?
Yeah. So like I said, I always like at Google multiple times I build teams and organization around technological and product areas that I got excited about. I did not feel hungry to build my own company. First, because like I said, I really like the scale and the diversity, and I did not want to go into one thing. I also did not want to, take again all the stress and operation. And the only upside I've seen at the time was, economically. And I said, hey, I don't need that. I would actually enjoy more working with founders as an investor. And I also thought that I would learn more. I'll get to see more. I'll get but what I learned over my career path is every time you go to a new domain, like a new universe opens up. I worked on emerging markets, it was a whole universe. I worked on YouTube, it was a whole universe. I worked, in Assistant, it was a whole universe. I moved to cloud, like every industry you learn so much. As an investor, you have the opportunity to be exposed to all of them. You do need to go deep. So you get that. I do have the hunger of building. So I actually satisfy this in two ways. Like I said, I create AI art. But also my partner and I, we are building our own AI automation of our own fund, coding it ourselves, with two goals. First, we love building. We also think that our differentiator is that we really understand the technology, and this allows us to see, because I think a lot of people are feeding off whatever marketing they are reading on the internet. I don't want to have my views being shaped by somebody else's marketing. So we try a lot of tools, we try a lot of models, we build it ourselves. We are automating our own fund using AI. So I still get that. And when I have time, I'm building, AI art projects. So I feel it's a good balance. And I enjoy working with the founders and getting deep into it. I didn't catch myself saying, "Oh, I wish I was like working now in a company." No, I'm super happy where I am.
Yeah, so you get to kind of dip your toes into multiple different projects. So, but the VC investing space, particularly in AI, it's looking a bit crowded. So McKinsey, or was it EY, that released a study that the Q4 of 2024, I think 60% of all early stage investments were in AI. And when I read things like this, and I read the news and see all of the deals coming in, it's giving me a feeling of the dot-com era of the 90s. It's giving me this feeling that we might be kind of overhyping, and there might be some sort of a boom bust that we can expect. What are your thoughts on that? Just as someone who's in AI, it is your job to basically, decipher like what's hype and what's actually valuable. Like, how do we make sense of all of this activity? I mean, at some point the liquidity is gonna come to an end.
So there are two sides to that. First, I think there is a real opportunity that's like, real, and I think like it's bigger than anything we've ever seen. And there is a big why now. So there is really transformational technological and product transformation, meaning things that were very hard or impossible are now possible to make. And there are actually multiple factors. It just happens that once you build these models that understand the world and understand language, they can do a bunch of things that each one of them is like a huge reason for a whole way to build software. But together, it's like unprecedented. So first, they understand instructions. All right, so suddenly
we can actually have a technology that you can tell it very loosely what to do, and it can actually complete tasks that are very complex. The second thing is that they understand unstructured data. And everything around us is unstructured. Videos, books, documents, images, medical images, code, hardware designs, right? So suddenly you have a system that actually you can just give her an image of all the world, and I don't think, there is also radar information, other frequencies, right? All of this information can go into the system. It can actually understand it. It can generate these things as well, right? So it can generate any modalities and it can follow any instruction. It also just happens that these systems, because they know how to use the language, you can actually bootstrap them in the world as it is working today, and it is very good at using tools that were intended for humans. It can make phone calls, it can write code, it can use apps, it can use browsers, so you can actually complete tasks in kind of a robotic way that was impossible before. And also, very interestingly, it also contributes to other areas that we wouldn't think it would contribute. So, for example, the way we trained robots until now was what we call reinforcement learning. It means that you let the robot try, and when it's kind of, it's doing a good thing, you give a positive reward. When it does a bad thing, you give it a negative reward. But it's a very complex way for robots to learn. Imagine I want to train a robot to go from the living room and open the door. Somehow it needs to find the way to the door. It needs to figure out, because it doesn't know anything. It needs to press the handle. Now it's locked. It needs to realize that there is a lock over there. It needs to think there is the key. The key is in my wallet. It needs to figure out that to take out the key, how to use it, right? All of this just by trying stuff and getting signals. This is why you needed trillions or billions of examples for reinforcement learning, and it was ineffective. But if you now give the robot a large language model that actually sees what the robot sees and give it hints, what are the, kind of, go over there, pick that, right? So it can direct. So instead of searching on all possible actions, it directs it to do the right actions. You can actually train robots much faster. So that's just an example why suddenly there is also a why now moment, also for robotics and other things that are adjacent. So there is definitely an opportunity now to change the entire way that software is being built, but also introduce software to places that before that you could not use software, because the old way of building software just didn't work. So I don't think there is hype. I think we are really looking at a fundamental kind of, industrial era point. So yes, it's not hype. I think the entire economy is going to change. I do think that there is a lot of risks, and I think the biggest risk of all is commoditization. So I think what is happening, when you're investing in stuff, I think the most important thing to know is what is easy and is about to be commoditized or is commoditized in the short term and you shouldn't invest in. What is impossible and it's a waste of money and you shouldn't invest in, versus what is actually hard and worth investing in. And I think that for AI, there is a big confusion about that. And the time between it's impossible to do and it's completely commoditized is about 12 hours. I think one recent example, about 4 weeks ago, OpenAI launched their deep research mode. Sam Altman said, we can automate. We calculated and we can automate away 8% of the human workforce, which is a huge number. 24 hours later, Hugging Face, 4 people created an open source a clone of that. Right? So basically the time between, I made this crazy breakthrough, to the time that actually it's completely commoditized, go figure out how to make margin out of that, is 24 hours. And we've seen it, with DeepSeek, we've seen it so many times. Models are getting cheaper 10x every year, faster, 10x every year. The cost of improving intelligence is 100x faster every year. So I think the biggest risk for investors, if you ask me where the bubble is that I see a lot of companies that are currently automating human processes that are very expensive and inefficient. So there is money on the table today to take a work that is currently manual and automate it. And there is margin to be made because humans are more costly. However, I think that this capability is going to be commoditized in the middle term, and these companies that are now maybe sometimes raising hundreds of millions in a highly commoditized, highly a competitive space, you end up competing on price. And I think that is like, especially in the enterprise space, all the ability to connect to systems, to pull information, to automate, and to push information will be completely commoditized. That is my opinion. And no, and I think that this is where the bubble is. I think that companies that are currently having, ARR, like annual recurring revenue, I don't think it's recurring. I think that they will be pressed down by competitive pressure. I also think that the way that software is being built will change inherently. I think one analogy I kind of like is like, think about Excel, right? So Excel is this kind of very powerful platform where billions of users use, and there is no man in the middle, person in the middle that build Excel's up. The users are doing that hyper-personalization, verticalization at the end. And the user can be really the user that is using, or that guy on the team that knows how to build complex Excels, or maybe someone that is a consultant that, helps you build some very complex Excel for a few weeks. But there are no companies that are making margins on a recurring. You're not paying license for, it's very rare. And I think Gen AI and agents will be the same to a large extent, but to a much, much broader surface area. And we are already seeing that the models are commoditizing. There is prices dropping, but the models are becoming agentic, right? What was used before just the Gen AI is now, the models are completely agentic.
Okay.
And
so when you're investing, because yes,
Yeah.
I understand that there's no hype, there's real value.
Yes.
Of course, there are risks that we should consider, but there is a lot of noise, right?
Yes.
Every day there's maybe, I don't know how many hundreds of AI startups popping up everywhere. And as an investor who's trying to find the value among the noise, what is your strategy there? What makes a good startup that Ellipsis would invest in?
So we have very simple criteria. So first, I think the most important thing, the essence of any, the first commandment of software building, you should be solving a problem that is worth solving. So it needs to be, a big problem, growing problem, hard problem, something that delivers value so that you can actually capture value by solving it. I think that did not change. The second thing that did not change is that you need a team that actually can build a company, right? So you look at the team and you're asking for yourself, first, is that a team that can lead the company? Leading a company means, can they recruit? Can they deal with obstacles and challenges? Can they sell? Can they get partners? Can they raise money, right? And then there is, of course, are they domain experts? Are they top 1%, right? So we look at all of these that were correct before. The other thing that did not change is that if you want to have a high margin business, and this requires high margin business, you need to have some moat. You need to have some defensibility. So the principle did not change. I think what changed is where is that, where is the baseline? This is what I'm saying, that to a large extent, that baseline is now commoditized. But we have two very, very simple criteria that we're looking for. We believe there are only two modes. One, either the problem that you are solving requires unique data that is very hard to scrape or generate. The second thing that we require is that the problem you are solving requires unique expertise that is not easy to find. And by the way, these are very easy to state, but with models that are getting PhD levels, finding these is becoming very hard. In terms of areas that then we're looking one at automating, but we're looking at automating processes, not tasks or jobs, which we think are commoditized. And I can give some examples. So, for example, we invested in a company that uses unique, so they go to a manufacturing plant and they use reinforcement learning to optimize the manufacturing process, how much energy they are using, and an overall optimization. It's called UNAI. It's in Germany. So again, it uses unique proprietary data, which is actually the manufacturing data. You cannot find it. The models has nothing to do with it. And they are solving this very kind of complex job. We invested in another company that has a very special angle in a drug design, special protein designs that have certain attributes that are relevant to drugs. So again, what they are doing, they have unique expertise that allow them to design very specific proteins. This is data that doesn't exist elsewhere that actually has value for very specific design. So again, data, expertise, and hard problems. The other area that we are looking at is a new software stack is being built. And within that, and you touch a little bit, new challenges and new pieces need to be reinvented or invented if they did not exist. I think the poster child of that is security, right? Everyone is now trying to launch agents that can automate stuff. This means that these agents have access to all the systems of a company. They can write into it as well. How do you protect that, maliciously or accidentally they don't do a disaster? So there is a lot of companies that are looking at how to solve the security. So we invested actually in one from ETH that have a unique expertise. We invested in another company, for example, that is looking, hey, how can I take some of these large models? This is a company that is called OpenInfer. How can I take these large models that can actually act on a large context, right? So you can put a lot of context with, but I want to run it on a device and maybe on a normal device. NVIDIA is launching these monstrous GPUs, but still vast majority of users have a normal laptop. If you're running routers on the internet and you want to run models for security and analysis, you are limited by the hardware that you can put. If you have devices, Internet of Devices, you are limited in their hardware and power. So for example, so they solve how can you scale this AI to edge devices. So we get very hard problem, requires unique expertise. So this is the kind of things that we're looking. Unique expertise, unique data, very hard problems, very hard processes. And another thing that we always encourage and are looking for is you should deliver value very early on, but once you're deployed at a customer, and if you compare day 1 and day 100, there needs to be a very clear differentiated difference. Day 100 needs to be much, much better. So you should learn and improve, because that, again, increases the switching cost. So even if someone comes and has maybe a cheaper or slightly better, the customer knows that they invested already time and they will go back, right? So that's another aspect. But again, the criteria is very easy. Hard task, either unblock Gen AI and unique data and unique expertise. And that's like a very easy criteria for us.
And would you say there's probably, because as a VC investor, for you, measuring success, it's really based on, exits, IPOs.
Yeah.
How can you kind of get the value at the end of the loop? And I imagine in the B2B space, that's where there's most activity. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think for sure we'll see a ton of liquidity and acquisitions. We've seen it before in internet, in cloud, in mobile. I think, we're even seeing it today. Google, Microsoft, and others are already making these very large acquisitions. I think you have a second line, IBM, Oracle, Salesforce, and others that I think like they are missing some critical assets. I think you're seeing a lot of existing SaaS players that the main asset that they have is they own the customers at the moment. They know that there is some expiration date on that, right? So they need to move fast. I think they will realize very soon that they cannot move fast as some of the startups. So there will be this kind of acquisitions. I think some of the acquisitions will not succeed. I think the ones that deliver real value, defensible, are the ones that will succeed. I think, yes, the IPO is a great question. I think generally, if you extrapolate, people have been talking about the one-person unicorn, that the assumption of the industrial revolution that a successful company requires a lot of resources and requires a lot of CapEx and OpEx, and that CapEx and OpEx need to be somehow raised either in the private or the public market. I think that is now actually being put into question, because maybe through the, Gen AI, you don't need to hire so many people. You don't need to hire as many resources. You can optimize. I think the first, VCs are in the first line of fire, because I think they're the first one that will see it and will suffer. But actually, I think that question, a lot of us are invested in these markets, 15, 20, between 10 to 20 years from now, I think the whole way markets operate could change drastically.
Okay, talking about 10 to 50 years from now, I want to shift gears because as exciting as AI is, I mean, I'm using ChatGPT. It's saved me so much time and other AI products. So I see the value that you're explaining. But if we're to kind of forecast into the future, there are also some things that scare me about AI.
Yeah.
You mentioned, for example, that you love art. I also love art and making films, and there's kind of a risk to human creativity. What does that mean? There's a risk to human genuine connections. For example, this I forget what it's called, a Second Life or something like that, where people can make AI friends online.
Yeah.
And there's been reports people falling in love with AIs
Yeah.
and being more secluded and isolated. So as much as there's this huge positive current of how AI is helping us, saving us time, optimizing, saving us a lot of money too. At what cost is it coming, like for our societies? I mean, let's start, for example, at a very specific thing like careers, right? You mentioned earlier that a lot of functions are going to become redundant, but at the same time, a big part of your VC criteria is who's the team, right? Like how do we make sense of this discrepancy that we're going to get rid of a bunch of people in terms of roles and jobs, but somehow we still need that human element? How do we make sense of this? How do we prepare ourselves? Should we all become AI experts to not become redundant?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, warning, I'm an optimist.
I can tell.
So, for my, first, I know that my crystal ball is as crappy as everyone else's, and the future is always surprising. But I find it very helpful when I try to think about the future to think about the past.
Mm.
And if we were like doing this podcast, 150 years ago, you would ask me, hey, what all these children that are cleaning chimneys will do, and what all these women that are knitting in the darkness during the winter days will do if you're manufacturing clothes in your factories, and all. What do we do with all of these farmers are becoming redundant? And then I will tell you, no, actually, imagine a world where everyone until the age of 22 doesn't need to worry and kind of studies, and they become kind of expert, and they can do more. And you would be laughing at me like, are you crazy? Women studying, low, middle class kids studying, farmers, the animals that they're taking smart right. Like, that was the perception, only 150 years ago. And we created a world where actually, the quality of life and education and whatnot. I think there is a ton of headroom to live in a world. Why can't we have a world where actually you continue studying, until you're 45 or 50, or you never stop studying? Like, when I ask the average person, how many languages do you speak and how many would you like to speak? It's always like, how many musical instruments do you play? How much you would like to play? How many hobbies do you have? How much would you like to have? How many sports do you do? How much you like to do? Why not have everyone kind of, do multiple PhDs? And I think like, I also personally believe that people that are educated, they see more the common than the different, are less likely to be manipulated by populist political parties and other stuff. They are more informed, more critical thinking. So I think like there is a much better society. I think actually AI has a lot of opportunity also. I think we need to improve education. I think putting people 45 in the current education system is not great, but I think that will improve. And also, like, if people come to me and say, hey, tomorrow we have all of these people that don't need to be employed in these offices, what do we do? I say, I know. Find the top 500 NGOs and put people on that. Right? Because it's not like they're going away with the resources. Like, you have the same resources, pay them to do some stuff, put them in where we're lacking critical manpower, teaching, supporting parents, social workers. There's so much to be done. A lot of people are saying that it's not that AI is stealing our jobs. We've been stealing AI jobs that shouldn't be done by humans. And again, when we look back, children should not clean chimneys, and farmers shouldn't, work the way farmers work. And I think like very few children dream to be 8 to 5 in an office doing paperwork. You're kind of tunneled over there. So I think like actually this world is not where people are redundant, but I think actually people will have more opportunities to pursue real passions and to develop as humans and work on the human relationships. I'm also not worried about humans' relationships and art and stuff. Um, I think for the longest time, kids had dolls and we have pets and, we're interacting with additional things. Some people are emotionally attached to their car and to other stuff, or to sports gear. And so I think like, um, talking about art, when I was first trying to do AI, I was trying to talk with the contemporary art world, and they told me, no, don't want to hear you. AI is by people, for people. We don't want any machines. And then I told them, okay, so imagine aliens are coming to Earth, and these aliens are saying, hey, we want to do art with you. We want to learn about your art. We want to show you our art. Would we tell them, no, art is like, for people and not even, and all of that. So I said them that, so AI is not artificial intelligence, it's alien intelligence. I actually bought the domain alienintelligence.org. um, and and I told AI, I cannot get you aliens, but AI is as alien as we can find. It is intelligent, it is capable, it does things in a different way. It's not like us exactly. Some things that are easy for us are hard for them, and vice versa, but the interaction is similar. So so I think like if an alien race comes to Earth, which is kind of happening, is that a bad thing? Does that, kills all our relationship? I don't think so. But I also think that we need to make sure that it's kind of a friendly race, right? Like, because that can, if they're like, if they have very different values or contradicting and they want to destroy it, then it's a different story than we have all seen in the movies. Um, but I actually think that it opens horizons that were locked. And I think like any other development in the past, usually scientifically or educationally, I think this unlocks this new thing, and there's so many opportunities to improve education, to improve wellness, to improve health, to help socially. Yeah, of course it can always go wrong, but usually I think it goes wrong because of people, not because of AI. And I think that's where we need to, as a society, um, how do we protect, right? But I think it's always the same problem, but it was a stick, then a sword, then a cannon, then a nuclear bomb, and like, it's just getting...
I think I'm maybe not as optimistic as you. I understand that, yes, as things evolve, we will learn how to handle some of those risks as well. So there's a lot of growing pains. We're at a really nascent period of AI development. But even if I think of learning and how we learn, I think the younger generation that are going to university, they kind of have a very cool shortcut to learning because they have this supercomputer in ChatGPT or any of these other chatbots that can kind of provide all the answers, and they skip this kind of really great process which we both in our age had the privilege of doing the hard work, finding things, mining for information, which I think there's still a value to that we might be erasing with this new technology. So even like you mentioned, oh, we'll have more time for PhDs. I think PhDs might become redundant with deep research and all of these other offerings.
So again, I think that we are always, like, humans tend to be super sticky about the very specific time and place they are born, and to think that this is like the level that we do now, the level we abstract things, is the right thing in any derivation. Again, if you go into the past, people would be shocked that the average person would not know the feeling of doing a cold winter or hunting a mammoth when they're starving. You do not know the skills of starting fire. You do not know collecting rain during the right night season. There is all, you do not know how to make your own clothes or your own shoes.
So Yariv, you're telling me I'm getting old, basically.
I'm telling you that I think
I'm too nostalgic for the good old days.
not to all the go, people were people don't know how to do a long division, right? People don't know how to solve a trigonometric function. People don't know how to calculate logarithms and integrals, right? Like, I think, like, doctors rely on X-ray and other machines. They don't go and pull. So I think like we constantly always forget old lower level and then reach higher level of abstraction using more complicated tools. we as humans don't become smarter, but as a society, we become, tenfold, a hundredfold, a millionfold smarter. Pilots are, losing skills, but our ability to actually transform stuff through the air, goes higher.
So basically freeing up bandwidth to learn higher level things.
Like, again, when Google came out, we're losing the ability to go to a library, but actually, your ability to research, your access to information actually grew, your ability to communicate. So yes, I think like we're at the moment of an intermediate way, right? So they were always like kind of looking, okay, there is this new way, we're looking the old way, it's not clear yet what this new way is bringing. But I think that like, it's like a calculator that like, we think about AI, about the first time that we're losing control over something due to its complexity. We've done it so many times in the past, there is so many systems, the economic system, no one understands it, and we are kind of victims to it, health, we don't understand, the physical world, we don't understand, we don't connect. So, having that big thing that we don't completely control and we learn to live with, and there is, upsides and downsides is not something new. And again, in adapting to new technology that makes all the challenges or skills irrelevant, the entire industrial evolution, right? We lost a lot of things. How do you do by hand? No one misses it, I think. So again, I'm optimistic, and I think that this will allow us, everyone is like, we want to maybe to live in other planets. At the moment, it seems crazy. But maybe that thing will suddenly become doable. We want to mine materials from other planets. That seems crazy. We want to be able to control more against natural disaster. The moment we don't know how to do it. We want to reduce pollution. There is a lot of hard problems that at the moment our level of intelligence is not enough, and our ability to commute is not good enough. We've seen COVID, how long. Imagine that it takes 5 minutes to find the cure for COVID. I think there is so much upside yet for challenges that we didn't solve, that it would be amazing if they become kind of, sure, the problem. So if kids lose some, I'm fine with that. Like, you can still as a hobby learn how.
I might be a bit nostalgic.
No, I think everyone is, but it's funny.
And
everyone is nostalgic to their own decade.
Yeah, this is true. And also I have 2 young girls. So I also, think about a lot about their future and what kind of world they're going to live in when they're adults. And my main thing is that I just hope that in their future there's still real human connection, human to human, as all of this AI kind of development is happening. I'm not too worried about the learning thing. I can get used to that, but I want them to have real interactions with real human beings in the real physical world. Okay, shifting gears. So you're from Israel.
Yeah.
Yes. So you moved here to join Google, correct? So we're also in a very interesting time in Zurich. I'm also not from Switzerland, originally from Namibia, but spend a lot of my time all over the world because my parents are diplomats. So we lived in South Africa, Ethiopia, UK, the US for a bit. And finally, I came to Switzerland because I met my husband and he dragged me here. No, I actually really love living in Switzerland. And but now it's really unique times because it seems that Zurich in particular is becoming somewhat of a AI epicenter. Open AI moving here, Anthropic. You've got Palantir as well. Of course, you also have DeepMind, AWS. All of these AI giants. What do you think is driving this kind of current to Switzerland and Zurich in particular?
So I can tell the Google perspective, how we became a 5,000, 6,000 people, without actually ever wanting to be such a big office, I think, in Switzerland. So, Switzerland itself is a great core, some good universities. So this is why you would want to come here. There is a good talent. And I think now there is also 5,000 to 6,000, I don't know the exact number, of Google engineers. That's a great pool for anyone to pull from. But the reason I think why companies are growing here is because when you are in a good economy that you want to grow fast, you want to grow anywhere in the world where you can attract talent, Switzerland is super attractive because in most places, the local talent is not enough. And especially if you want to hire senior people, usually you would need to move them from somewhere else, often from California. And there are very few places in Europe where actually people will be willing to move, right? Like, when they're checking about romantic places like Paris, London, or Germany, they figure out that they're cutting their salary by half. Companies actually that recruited and tried to cut down know that it's impossible to fire in some of these locations. So in Switzerland, it's very easy due to the visa and friendliness and everything to move people very quickly into the country. It's very attractive to move in very senior leads that are critical to build the critical mass. And there is, it used to be the case, I think, that there was good a talent from EPFL and ETH that could be the initial core, but now there is like beyond that, there, like you're saying, there is like, 10,000 or how many, Google, Microsoft, and all of these. There is actually a critical mass here. So it's super employer friendly, super employee friendly. People have the quality of life. It has very low attrition. It's relatively not that competitive, and it's quite comfortable. So I think like it's a real ideal place to grow a software.
Do you see it as potentially competing with Silicon Valley one day, or it lacks the
Silicon Valley? I don't know. I don't know if competing, right? Because I think like, like it is competing in a sense that, if you look at a lot of the Google employees over the years, were actually, kind of visa B1 people that were waiting, especially from India and China. Very easy to come to Switzerland. The plan was to come here 1 or 2 years until they get the visa, and they decided they actually want to stay here. But I don't think, it's like Israel. It's not competing. It's complementary. I think it's just another hub that can grow and become significant. I think it is still small in terms of the number of startups, but it's growing fast. I think just over the last year, there is like, 10 AI companies that were started by ex-Googlers, and ETH is an amazing machine of, tens or even more, hundreds of spin-offs. I think EPFL is kind of learning how to create the spin-offs. So there are all the ingredients. Usually what is needed to create a strong ecosystem of startups is kind of role models. You need to see a success, right? So in Israel, the one moment in time is when ICQ was acquired by Mirabilis for $500 million. Everyone, wow, this is possible, right? And then you had like kind of flood of people going to the startup. In Switzerland, although there is a surprisingly large number of unicorns that originated from here, still, I don't think a lot of people know about them. It was more of an insight, but I think now there is more and more companies, and I think Cradle is a super nice example. Now that's fast growing, and people are learning about it, and others. So I think as ETH, Google will create these successful companies that will have exits, young people will say, oh, it's possible, this is how you do it, here's how, they will join. So yeah, I think, and the country, the country is kind of, always was zero natural resources, no access to see. It was all about human ingenuity and innovation. I think Swiss innovation was a bit different than startup, which actually, startups, the product is a unicorn, right? You should always ask yourself, why do I want to work in a place where the product is a unicorn, right? Swiss was always very good at, okay, here's something with product market fit. Now we're going to scale it super well. But I think they are very good at building industries that are all about human resources and human ingenuity. So I think all the factors are here, and I'm very bullish about
You're at the right place at the right time, Yariv. You made the right bet.
Yeah, and we go, by the way, we're not investing only in Swiss. We are definitely investing in Swiss, but we invest in Europe and in Israel and the US. Yeah. So.
So before we wrap up, maybe you can tell us a bit about what we can expect from Ellipsis. What's ahead? What's exciting you in the next months, the next years?
Yeah. So actually, when we started the Q4 2023, I think that was like the first investment. We decided very deliberately not to raise a fund. So we said, let's spend the year investing from our own money. So we have a skin in the game, demonstrate that we can actually generate a good a deal flow, that let's make sure that we have a learning curve, that we create a very professional investment process, investment committee, and we set at the time a very aggressive, what seemed to be aggressive target of investing in 10 companies. We actually invested in 12, 13 companies, and we actually started raising the fund itself only Q4 last year. So we are continuing to investing, but we're actually raising a fund now. So we want to raise a $70 million fund. keep the focus on very early stage. We're doing first checks, pre-seed and seed, very hands-on. All the focus stays the same, but we want to be able, instead of doing 200K checks, to do 2 million checks, right? So basically to 10x the check. So I think like raising and making this big check and co-leading is one big thing. We invested in great companies. All of them raised enough money to do 18 to 24 months of a runway. So they have a little bit more, but like some of them will start to raise. So we're hoping to see the next round. And we're looking to be very active in universities and hubs and connect with founders early on. So we're looking and thinking of ways how to work with students, universities to help kind of create this kind of Silicon Valley in Zurich and in other hubs in Europe. So yeah, you should see us over there as well. Yeah.
Exciting times ahead. Well, Yariv, thanks so much for joining our Sync episode. It was really great to hear your insights. I'm still nostalgic, so I'm
Me
not
too.
sure I can let go of the 90s. The
I'm happy it's like
good old
progress,
days.
like to be honest. I think that like when you have these things, the people like me, I always say, well, I'm so happy. After my career, if I need to start now, it was impossible. I think all the kids, my kids are saying, oh, we're so happy this is happening now. If we need to be like our parents, we'd be lost. And then you have these like people in the middle that are a bit stuck, and I feel for them, how will they transition? But for my kids, I'm pretty sure that they're very happy how the world has shaped.
Well, time will tell.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yariv.